is the traditional lands of the Kumeyaay people, and the Kumeyaay people lived in peace and in prosperity until white settler colonialism contacted them in the 16th century. So having said that, I also want to recognize the previous presentations that really tie in well on decolonizing assessment and also international collaborations through virtual learning. Our human rights practice program is fully online. It is something that we sometimes take for granted, that we're doing all of these collaborations in an online environment. There's a video in the conference drive, a link to it about this collaboration that we're going to talk about today. The video was made by Emmy Award filmmaker Leslie Epperson. Those of you who direct programs, I highly recommend you hire a Emmy Award filmmaker because she can really help promote our program. And I hope if you had a chance to watch it, it's 9 minutes long, you have a good sense of not only what we did in spring 2021, but also the students' reactions and the community members' reactions. This is a Prezi slide that I had to make to keep track of what was happening in spring 2021. I knew that Leonard, who's in human rights practice and Judaic studies, was working with Liudmila and in Russian studies. I knew her undergraduate class was working with our graduate class. I knew they were working, and I know this is kind of blurry, but the point is the absolute large number of nodes that they made happen. And this was not a grant-funded course. This was not a grant-funded project. This was just part of Leonard's normal load, part of Liudmila's normal load. We had a collaboration with American University of Central Asia in Kyrgyzstan, and we knew that they knew some NGOs that Leonard had worked with as well. And so I knew that was happening. But then Leonard one day said to me, you know, those St. Petersburg students are amazing. And I was like, which St. Petersburg students? He goes, oh, didn't you know Liudmila hooked us up with St. Petersburg University, and one of their classes is working with us on that same class. I said, really? And then like a week later, he said, you know that NMAP they just gave a great presentation on marketing of human rights and development issues. I said, I didn't know NMAP from New York City was involved in this. And so it ended up being, I think it's 15 nodes. There were classes from 3 different countries, 4 different disciplines. There were something like 8 or 9 guest speakers, and our students were working with NGOs in Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and I think Russia, but I'm not sure. But I was just floored by this, but it really is kind of the ethos of our program that, and we'll talk about it, but also the ethos of Leonard and Liudmila, who both believe that more the better, that the class is going to be driven by real world projects, and the problems in the real world will lead us to who we collaborate with and who we bring on board. So it was a lot of fun to hear more about it. So Leonard?
Yeah, I think this one, yeah, you kind of approach this stuff, and certainly with regards to experiential learning and thinking about projects and thinking about, and of course the online program, as you said, Bill, in the previous sessions, it's all leading up to like a lot of these things that we've been thinking about, which is great. And you sort of think about, okay, well, you have context here and you have context there, and there's certainly, students can certainly grow and learn from even an online environment, by having different insights and different approaches and seeing how other people work, and also contributing to other people's work. And that's really what we were trying to do here. That was kind of the ground. And for me at least, affiliating and working with Liudmila from the RSSS, Russian Slavic Studies, was just like really, it was beautiful opening for me, because of course, in the language side, it opened up a whole bunch of different potentiality for projects and even broadening the work, but also just working with other people with different views, different ideas and desires, what they want to do in their courses. For me, it opened up more, it made me a better educator with regard to what I'm doing with my human rights students, and I think made my students better as well. So that was really engaging multiple departments at the UA, and really just such a pleasure to work with Liudmila. And like Bill said, the different structure is they kind of, our program is externally driven in the sense that we always seek out guest lecturers. I've had the pleasure of already writing to people from this conference and asking them some guest lecture and other courses that I'm teaching, which I'm really excited about, and hopefully it'll work out. But we kind of, Liudmila and I kind of fitted in by saying, okay, well, what are our needs? What do we want to do here? And here was really the idea was that we kind of pulled together other projects and made it kind of media oriented, social media oriented, actually creating podcasts was the idea. So we said, okay, gosh, what can we integrate here? And obviously, as with journalism, documentary filmmaking and things like that, but also NMAP was this really cool new media advocacy project. They're all over the place, and they really deal with narratives and really thinking about and how to break that down and how to then create a, let's call it a unified message, if you will, not as on a marketing sense, but more of an understanding who you're talking to and why and all those different things. And it was, I know for me and for the students, it was incredible. It was really mind-opening in terms of having them as a guest lecturer, and of course having the various NGOs in the region to hear what are their issues, what are their desires, and that's always very important to us as well, is not to go in there and say we want to do a project, more what do you need? Where do you want to go? Do you need financial, applications for grants, or is it more getting messages across and different things like that? And then, of course, just trying to follow this slide a little bit, the project themselves are, as I said, part of the course curriculum, and podcast creation. And what do we have there? Expanding traditional learning outcomes, broadening the student's perspective, exposure to different groups. What was really important for us was, and then I'll stop here, is that it's group oriented, so the students were inherently in groups for their work, but the groups had to be comprised of students from overseas, both Russia and in this case, the AUCA students from Bishkek actually come from the whole Central Asian region and Afghanistan. So it was actually really rich type of student body. So we make sure to have students from every single component, along with the Russian and Slavic studies language students who, as Liudmila would say themselves, were graduate students from other disciplines as well. So it was incredibly rich and just beautiful layers being composed here, having all these students come together in one room and figuring out almost amongst themselves, okay, what role can I play here? Okay, I know the language, I know media, I know, I'm on the ground and I can interview homeless people, whatever it might be that needs to be done. It was just a beautiful coalescence of different things.
Yeah, just to reiterate, I think this gets a little confusing sometimes, but so almost all of our classes in our master's program have students working with NGOs around the world on real world projects. So we have students from many different countries and all over the US, and they're working with NGOs on a problem brought to us by that NGO. And so I just worked, my class, we just worked with Cure International on a project they were doing in Ethiopia. Before that, one of my courses worked on Rohingya refugee issues in Bangladesh. And these are virtual classes, and they're also, to make it even more difficult, they're 7.5 week long classes. So in 7.5 weeks, students who knew very little about Central Asia they learned the culture, the history, they learned the politics, and then they worked with an NGO on issues like homelessness, or they worked on gender rights or the environment. And they worked in interdisciplinary teams of students, faculty, and community members working on a real world problem. Now, it just happened that this class, all the NGOs really wanted to do marketing, and they all wanted to do podcasts. So that made it easier for Leonard and Liudmila because they only had to work on one marketing technique. Liudmila?
Yes, thank you, Bill. I will talk a little bit more on the pedagogical side. As you know, I have a degree in education, and for me, just bringing all these components together was a little confusing because I didn't want to have just a sort of a messy multi-component syllabus. for my students, but I actually wanted to see how different components fall together in a more kind of streamlined approach to what we're doing. And for these purposes, we used something that we will share with all of you, a template that is called Project Square approach. And here we are focusing on the project as the ultimate, the final goal for the course. And since we were working across multiple disciplines, we needed to kind of align these disciplines. And first of all, just to decide for ourselves, what is it that exactly what we are teaching. In my case, I was teaching Russian and Slavic studies. Bill and Leonard came from human rights practice, but we also had our international partners. And our Russian partner, they were representing the Department of International Studies. We also had a partner in Kyrgyzstan, also focusing on human rights. And aligning them within Project Square kind of allowed us to see, okay, these are our teams and these are our partners. And the next step was to look at our learning objectives. What is it that we wanted to do with our students individually in all of our courses, and where were the points of intersection? Where could we do some mutual work or group work so students can learn from each other and from different disciplines, but yet still engage in the subject matter of the course that we're enrolled in. And aligning learning objectives, and this was the second cell in the Project Square, kind of helped us see, okay, what is it that we can do across 4 or 5 disciplines. And in the case of the project that we're presenting to you today, the idea of narrative, shaping a narrative for social mobilization efforts made sense on so many different levels: international studies, Russian studies in terms of language and understanding the cultural context, and of course, human rights and marketing, intersection of human rights and marketing. Thinking about forms of media and public notification campaigns that brought a more kind of modern kind of social media component and more practical applied component. How do you create a social media for public notification campaigns? And also thinking about having students do something that they can take away with them and maybe put in their portfolios and be proud of, being engaged in a project where they actually contributed their work and to something that really makes a difference in the community that they were working with. And in that case, we were thinking about the real life social media product that we wanted them to deliver at the end of the project. That moves me to the second line in the Project Square template, where we had to define the problem, challenge, or question. And it's very, very important in project-based design to orient students to concrete challenge. So they don't just do different things without really understanding why they do them, but there has to be a real life problem that sort of ties all those lines of inquiry, lectures, public lectures, group work together, so they know what they're doing and why they're doing what they're doing. In our case, because we were working with a number of NGOs, and you can see them listed under partners, we worked with New Media Advocacy Project, we had a number of Central Asian NGOs, and I will tell you the spectrum of different issues, social issues that were addressed by our NGOs, and it's really a very wide, diverse list of things. Film and journalism, well, with Russian studies, it's of course culture studies, studies of the region, regional studies. And we also brought to this class some of our former students, and we used them as experts because they could share some of their previous work and sort of provide some guidance and modeling. What is it that you could do potentially with your group work with this project? And going back to the idea of a problem, question, or challenge, this was actually, and my students pointed out at this point, at this element of the course in particular, this helped students think more in more concrete terms in terms of what is it that was required of them. And we framed the question as how can we raise awareness of acts? And this was a concrete social human rights issue in the region. And that issue was brought to us by our so-called real client, our NGO. NGO would say, well, this is what we're working on. We need more awareness of this issue in our community. And this is how that issue became our project line. And we wanted this to be also oriented. We also set an audience for the social media product. So for the audience we were thinking about local population, stakeholders, again, depending on the issue. This was decided by individual groups themselves. And in the last line of this project, we can go back. I'm going to just briefly mention this last two cells of the last row in the project square. Real life product is very important. So you have to have a problem, but you want to also students to understand what is coming out of it, what is required of them in terms of a deliverable, as we say it. And for us, it was, we all agreed, and our NGOs wanted to have a podcast or a series of podcasts. This was a real life product that is available now that students can share with their other professors, and NGOs are using our podcasts for their marketing purposes as well. And I also put public audience for the product, and I already mentioned it, but you can see them in the project square. Just briefly, looking at all these components together really helps build the pedagogy, right? Without it, you don't really see, okay, you bring guest lecture, but you don't really see how things work together, but for one streamlined approach. But looking at all these components, yeah, I know why we're doing what we're doing. I know how each group of students can contribute to this project. Next slide. I have a few examples of things that we did, again, just to give you an idea of what you could do potentially for your work, for your students and courses. In terms of guest lecturing, for example, we brought a variety of different specialists because students were working with podcasts, so we needed to bring someone who understands the social media design. So we had a specialist on social media design. We also brought someone who spoke about narratives and change of narratives for social campaigns. This was a very fascinating lecture. Listening, research, audience listening and research, understanding orientation at a particular audience, a particular group of people. How do you design a podcast that it reaches a specific audience and is understood by a specific audience? So we had all those components, and they kind of worked together to prepare students for the development of their social media product. Next slide. Just again, for the sake of time, we really don't have time to talk about all of these projects because each group pursued their own project. But to give you an idea of the range, a wide range of things that our students did just in one class. We're not talking about different classes, but these are just different teams working within the same class, even in a 7-week session. We had one group working with women's rights in Kyrgyzstan. They were specifically targeting a particular area in Kyrgyzstan. We had another group working with homelessness and housing rights in Kyrgyzstan. It was a slightly different location in Kyrgyzstan. Ecotourism was very relevant in connection to Kazakhstan. As you can see that we geographically moved to another country in Central Asia. And it aligned very nicely with what we do in Arizona at our local community with ecotourism. We also had an NGO working with civil society oversight of parliamentary assembly that was also more focused on education, educating people, local communities in voting and politics, and gender issues. We also had another NGO working with gender issues in the community and gender rights. I will share with you, for the sake of time, I will not be playing one of the podcasts, but I will explain what it is a bit later, and I'll share the link with you. It's fairly long, so we're not going to use that time, but just to give you a sense of what actually the students actually produced at the end of their course. So doing all this required us to rethink our learning outcomes. What is it? How do we move the work that we do in the classroom, that I hear called scripted classroom activities, what we usually do in the classroom without understanding what the real world is, into some real world experiences. And here I'm giving you an example of what I did in my class, and my class was had a focus on language skills. This was an advanced Russian class, but it also had a very strong cultural component. So the title of the class is Russian in a cultural context. So we needed to try to see both sides within this project. And I'm shifting from practicing Russian skills in the classroom to acquiring skills necessary to collaborate with others in a professional setting. So it's a completely different environment, but that professional setting is no longer imaginary, but it's actually real. It's a real team, international team, where we need experts in the language, we need experts in the region to help coordinate the work of the entire team. Understanding operations of NGOs. Again, not everyone knows what an NGO is, but how do they function? Where do they get funding from? How do they put in efforts to raise civic awareness? How do they mobilize public for some meaningful social cause? So all those issues were included, and we treated them from the cultural perspective, but also from the language perspective. Students acted as translators and interpreters, both for different types of interviews, communications, project meetings, group meetings. They prepared short communications and reports in Russian after attending guest lectures. They applied language skills in planning and producing. So they actually planned out the scripts of podcasts. They prepared questions. They did a lot of translation work, and coordinating activities with foreign language students was also part, because they involved the Russian skills, but also understanding of the culture of communication. This also involved reflection. In any project work, reflection is an extremely important component. We want to have students not only reflect at the beginning and at the end of the project, but have this continuous reflection where they understand, why did I do, what did I do this week? Why did I do it? How does it bring me to this final outcome for the project? What did I do to kind of get closer to producing the final product or the final podcast? So we used the prompts in our reflection. There were 5 guiding questions, and this is in my class. I had students describe every week what they did with working with the international teams. We did not participate in the team meetings unless we were invited to help resolve some of the questions. But overall, there was a lot of guidance taken over by the students themselves. So it was their initiative. Thinking about also describing any new information, skill, knowledge they learned. Sometimes occasionally they would say, oh, I did not know the concept of time is different. People don't perceive time the same way as we do here in the United States. There were some interesting cultural discoveries or aha moments that came out of those reflections that otherwise we would have missed if we didn't do them on a regular basis. Describing any problems, challenges, this was also an important sort of avenue for students to think about, oh, why did it not work? What we did this week, what was the challenge? So a way to tell us through those reflections what was not going well, so we could interview if we needed, or we could provide additional guidance, or we could bring another lecture, guest lecture, so students can understand what they're doing. And describing also the sense of accomplishment is very, very important, that emotionally you understand that you're doing something important. It's not just for a class, but you're actually making a difference in the world. And we wanted this to be a weekly realization. So that's why weekly reflection is very, very important. We also did another reflection at the end of the project, where we combined the elements, reflective elements, with some information, or declarative knowledge, as we say, with some information the students acquired during the project. And you can see the prompts. I will not go into much detail, but you can see that it's not just about reflecting on what they learned about the region, but actually collecting all the information about the international NGO, the operations, how they acquire funding, the product, and how they designed the marketing campaign for the product. So there were many, many different components that included not only the cultural element of human rights element, but also the language component, where students had to engage the language skills in producing those documents. These are some of the, we can go back, yeah. These are some of the reflections from some of the responses that we received from students. And I just selected 3 to show you that we actually did have, we succeeded in making students' learning impactful. And for example, in the first quote, a student is saying that learning before this project, that student never considered non-governmental organizations. Our students are oriented toward income type of work, right? And all of a sudden, this has changed for the student. And this student is saying, learning about the good deeds that can get accomplished as a result of the work helped me start thinking, considering such work as a possible career. Another student is pointing out the idea that learning from the book is very different from learning from an expert, and even more different from learning from someone who has experienced an issue, a problem, and can share that experience with you. So that student says it was truly a treat to be able to learn about ecotourism from not only from the book of my own research, but also from experts on the topic, and also put together a podcast as becoming an expert, being in that role of suggesting topics and ideas for a podcast. And finally, this last piece here is from another student who says, I had no idea what Kyrgyzstan was. And I want to say that, well, for us, for international studies specialists, this might come as a surprise, but for a typical American student, they know, even geographically speaking, they sometimes don't know how to locate, they don't know where places are. But for this student, they wrote, I knew absolutely nothing about Kyrgyzstan, but I'm grateful to have had the opportunity not only to learn about the country, but actually to speak with women who live in this country and they experience inequality and learn about it firsthand. And it's one of those experiences that we usually don't deliver in the traditional courses. I think I will, at this point, I will stop and I will turn it over to Bill. I think, Bill, you're next. And we'll talk about more like bringing it to what was that guided us in this approach.
Thank you. And sorry, I got a little echo here. It's like I said before, we didn't have any extra resources for this course. This was just a regular course. Leonard was teaching as part of his teaching load. Liudmila was teaching as part of their teaching, as her teaching load. But what we've done in our human rights practice program is kind of develop a sense of a certain way of looking at pedagogy and looking at the curriculum. We believe that classrooms are open learning spaces. Whoever's interested can join. And so, especially through the Zoom environment, we're able to bring in people from many different countries, just as a matter of course. And our, if I'm going to, in fact, on Monday, I'm hosting a lecture on mindfulness and human rights. Well, I have people who are friends who work on mindfulness around the world. I've invited them all, and they're going to join. So it's like it's somebody from Croatia is leading it, but then people from Georgia and from Canada, the US, the UK, and other places are going to join. It's just kind of normal. Our students expect other people to be in the classroom with them. We think that each node adds value, not headaches. Most faculty, students, and NGOs want to be involved in this. They like this kind of stuff. NGOs, when you ask them, do you have any problems that you want addressed, almost always will say, oh yeah, we could really use student help with this. You need a supporting department chair. Thank you, me. We don't need large grants to make this happen. And then, as Liudmila so eloquently said, you need to change your learning objectives and assessment. And we'll talk about assessment in a minute. And this is a product square that Liudmila, this is the kind of, if you want to do this kind of pedagogy, I highly recommend you use the product square template. The link is on the PowerPoint and you can find that. But it really helped organize all these different nodes and all these different projects that were going on. I would like to be somewhat unfair and change topics a little bit. I assume you have some questions or comments about that experience, but one of the things we're doing in our program is we're trying to get other faculty around the world to adopt this kind of project-based learning that goes beyond borders, that involves multi-nodes. And as I actually got a grant to kind of to get faculty on board for trying new active learning pedagogies, very small internal grant. And the literature says, well, if you have good examples and you have good assessments that show that this works, faculty will be more on board. And so then we were like, okay, how are we going to formally assess these kinds of projects? And well, that leads to what's the goal of our program, which led us to think, well, the goals of our program is to have a decolonial, critical, anti-racism pedagogy and curriculum. Well, how do we evaluate whether we have a decolonial, critical, anti-racist, feminist, indigenous leaning pedagogy and curriculum? Well, we then looked for evaluation instruments, and this is where Sophie's work comes in. Sophie and I and Leonard and others have been working on this, is we decided we need to have some kind of scale to, you know, because the assessment folks love scales. So we need to have some way to determine if this is decolonial. So I think it's really cool what Leonard and Liudmila and their colleagues from around the world did. But I've also seen development projects that I thought were really cool that involved a lot of people, but didn't really change power relationships, didn't really change people's minds. And so the question was, how do we know whether what we're doing is decolonial? So Sophie and I and others have been working on creating a pool of items. We now are up to 92 items grouped into 12 constellations. And we've gotten this from scouring websites, looking at the various critical consciousness scales, all the psychology scales that are related to this. And we've grouped all those items into 12, what we call constellations, which I think mirror a lot what Chris and her group have come up with for their storytelling work, and others have already talked about today. But you can kind of see how these, you know, I think, you know, we might be missing something, but I think, you know, these are kind of the 12 main ways of looking at decolonization. But of course, in the spirit of decolonization, this isn't the final answer, right? So this is an exercise that we are constantly asking people for their contributions. Please read through this. Please give us your input. And we're going to have this up on a website where people are going to be able to tell us how they've used this scale, but also say, you know, well, question 7 just doesn't make sense in this context. Or they'll be able to say, well, and in fact, Sophie and I have been texting all day like, oh, shoot, we don't have enough questions on vulnerability. Oh, darn, we don't have enough questions on this, you know, as you all have been talking. So it's been a very productive day for us. And so as we check time, we only have about 20 minutes. I wonder if the best use, Leonard and Liudmila, of time, instead of going into breakout rooms, I wonder if we kind of show the decolonial scale and have people comment on that, but also comment on the multi-nodal problem-based learning as well. Is that okay?
Yeah,
Is that
I'd
okay?
love to hear. Yeah, sorry. I just would love to hear from people. Yeah, to use the scale. I want to see how it's going to be used.
Okay. Yeah, and so why don't maybe we can do that as a group. So I'm going to stop the share of this, and I'm going to share, and I know Ellie's got the link to this so people can see it all. So this is what 92 items looks like. And we don't expect anybody to use all of them, but what we, as we say, we'd expect, you know, programs or faculty or students to pick 10 or 15 of these items or 20 of these items. And they pick the ones that they think will be most useful. We really think that should be done as a group. We can see students coming together and picking items. We can see students leading this assessment exercise as well. So I know it's going to be hard. I don't want to give people migraines from scrolling, but maybe just focus on the first 2 at the beginning.
Yeah, and it's in the chat as well. Ellie uploaded it there, Google Doc. You can just surf over there if that's easier for anybody who wants to take a peek. Yeah, I mean, maybe Bill, if it's okay, I mean, it would be great to hear as you're all scrolling through to hear either, hey, what do we in this multi-nodal, what do we miss, what do we capture, but also in the overall, because I know this will help Bill for sure, and Sophie, with regard to, oh man, you know, what are you missing? What isn't missing from here that really jumps out and that, you know, you feel is imperative? If that's okay, Bill, I figure.
And you might want to also think of, you know, we say 0 to 10, so you might want to think about our course that, you know, you just heard a description of. You might want to think about a course or a project that you've been involved in and say, oof, you know, we would do, you know, 7 on this. And this is formative. This is not evaluative, right? So, you know, even though I've developed a scale, I don't have a land acknowledgement on my D2L or Canvas page, which, you know, it's a ding, I need to add one, but I haven't yet. So, John?
Yeah, thanks. This is kind of, I'm channeling Rachel Lockhart, I think, a little bit, so she can jump in and correct me, but I noticed that this is called decolonial rather than decolonizing. And I know that's maybe a fine point, but if you remember her remarks, if I think I'm remembering that it was Rachel, her remarks about the end, the achievement, kind of the achievedness of it versus the process of it. And so I mean, there's I think a few of, I mean, this kind of evaluation obviously is pointing to sort of a summative thing, but I guess my question is maybe can you reflect a little bit on sort of the use of this as a formative tool as well? I'm not sure that's a very clear question, but
yeah, no, but I absolutely, and you know, when she said that it was the present, you know, the ongoing tense, right? I mean, definitely, you know, decolonization is never over, right? So I think, you know, that definitely needs to be added in here in some way as an item, but also in the deployment of this, right? The idea that this is not, you know, kind of going to my example. I mean, I don't want this to be a tool or a cudgel to wield against somebody and say, you know, this, you know, you're a 2 on decolonization. I'd rather, you know, this be used as, you know, you're doing pretty good in some areas and you need to expand and you know, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? You know, so, but yeah, that process is so huge. Thank you for that. Yeah, Willie. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm wondering, and also this could be an opportunity for broader discussion if others want to weigh in, but you know, I just scrolled through the scale, so I might be missing something, but 2 questions or 2 things that maybe I don't see. I don't want to say that they're missing, but tell me what I'm not seeing. When I think about decolonization, or if I go back to like, you know, pedagogy be oppressed, which even if Freire wasn't using the language of decolonization quite as much as is trendy today, I think a lot of the sentiments are the same. And fundamentally, what I take from Freire, at least, is that the pedagogy be oppressed, or a decolonizing pedagogy, disrupts or even inverts the teacher-student hierarchy, which is itself a sort of mirror of and a microcosm of the broader like helper-helped hierarchy in a sort of development context. And a truly decolonizing approach, the teacher is also a student and the helper is also a one being helped, or, you know, and there's a process of mutual learning and mutual growth. And it just struck me as I read through, and so many of the items start with instructors, you know, and it's about like, here's what the teacher will do. Here's what the program will do for the community. And I'm just wondering to what extent, we can talk about the scale, or you can just talk about your practice more broadly, but to what extent are some of those relationships being sort of challenged or even inverted?
Yeah, and I'll start, Willie. I mean, the easy answer is for me to highlight, you know, these 6 items, right? You know, that, you know, you know, questions about hierarchy in the classroom, but, you know, I think, you know, it's not just, I think your question goes to not just these 6 items, but the other 86 are, you know, really instructor focused, and really we're assessing the instructor. or the program. And really, I think it goes to one of my comments this morning, which was that, are we assessing the substance or or are we assessing the relationship, right? Because, one of the great things about Freire is that he's also talking about responsibility of the learner and of the instructor, right? And so that, the learner, is contributing to that ethos in the classroom. And so I think that's huge. I think we definitely need to include that, or at least, think about, even though we say, the instructor, opened up, the syllabus to, input or whatever. I think though that you're talking about a deeper issue, which is like the agency of the learner, or of the student, if we use that term. So I think that's really interesting. I mean, I'll leave it to Liudmila and Leonard to talk about how this worked in practice. I mean, none of you, I don't think either one of you said at day one you're going to create podcasts. I don't think any of the student, I just think this was like an organic thing. And I know Leonard is not an expert on podcasts by any stretch.
And Liudmila, did you want to say something first?
Speaking of podcasts, I think one important component in the project that we described today was that we had students make decisions and collaborate and listen, and the ability to listen, to understand. This was also something that was usually not included in a typical class, but we wanted this to be strengthened in this type of collaboration. And also in the thinking, again, going back to this idea of critical, because we were working with Central Asia and students were working in groups, it's very important that we don't approach group work as American students trying to decide or solve problems in Central Asia, because that immediately creates this unbalanced sort of white supremacy, a westernized approach. We really want those groups to be mixed, collaborating. You listen to the person who can explain to you, who is on site, who can explain to you what the problem means to them in their scale of thinking. And I think this was also very, very critical. And this is something we also wanted to evaluate as potentially a learning outcome of this of the course. Leonard, what do you think?
Yeah, I know, totally. I know my podcasts, I do listen to them sometimes. But just to get back in a way, just to go full circle to Willie's question, I might be hoping I'm stepping on your Sophie's toes with regard to the scale and all that. But I kind of view it also as we're kind of purveyors, right? We're implementers on a certain level. I mean, that's on a certain level is kind of taking these different pieces and putting them into a collage, and then, oh, that's a nice piece of art, and that's kind of what's happening here. These little, or even as a puzzle, and they're coming together to make a nice picture. And I kind of see that it's not necessarily that I'm assisting to get that puzzle being put in. And I think I need to assess in my students or whoever else. By the way, this can be also utilized by the NGOs, by the project purveyors. That they. We didn't do that, but that's something that we could think about. That would be so cool. To hear them, because these are individuals who are out there, and they're, as you said, Willie, in your session, they're beset by people approaching them and obviously supporting them on a certain level. And it would be really cool for them to. I want them to assess us, and we kind of did, right? We kind of asked the project providers a little bit. I remember we had somewhat of an assessment, but not in a critical sense, which could be really insightful. So it's a long-winded answer, but I'm just trying to say is that I just see it as something that can be used, even if it's oriented towards instruction can still be morphed into answering questions and prodding us along to where we want to get to or try to get to.
Yeah, and Leonard, if I could follow that up, I mean, you kind of touch or imply two of my biggest concerns with this pedagogy, and I think there are critiques of development projects as well. One is and I forget if it was, I think it might have been Glenn Williams who talks about the development practitioner as shaman. And, you know, I'm worried that we bring all these pieces together and create this tapestry, and we are the shaman kind of, we pretend we're not really in charge, but we're in charge. We kind of bring it together, and we never really question our power in this relationship. And so I do worry about that. And then I also worry about the question of product. And I'm glad Liudmila said deliverable, right? I mean, because, you know, project-based learning or problem-based learning is to address a problem, and the problem, you know, leads to all these, you know, the problem determines the pedagogy, it determines the, you know, the methods, it determines the students' roles and all that. But in 7 weeks, the students have to produce a deliverable. You know, I mean, granted, we're all very flexible, you know, knowing that, you know, if they come up with half a podcast, that's amazing, you know, in 7 weeks. But I just wonder how much, you know, there may be a capitalist logic or something behind that is affecting how decolonialist can be. And so I have this deeper question about project and problem-based learning as to how, you know, is there a limit to how decolonial it can be, you know, besides walking, you know, into a classroom and being more free-flowing and not setting up a goal at the end. But that's, you know, those are questions that keep me up at night. So
I'm muted. I just and in a way, you know, we kind of have to address that, but you're right. You want to be careful, right, about this is the part. But it was more of reaching out to hear. In other words, I know both Liudmila and I, we wouldn't go to an NGO and say, you know, it was more of hopefully extremely driven of hearing, as you said, listening, you know, hey, what kind of starting with what are your needs? That's almost the first question we ask everybody. What do you need? And you know, kind of, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I spoke over you, Leonard, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the chat, I see there's a Vanilla Ice reference, which I think is the first time we've ever had a Vanilla Ice response. As far as John's question about intellectual rights, reuse, adaptation for this document, I mean, it would be kind of silly for us to be talking about decolonization and then say, no, nobody else can use it, and you have, if you do use it, it's going to be $100 fee, and you have to give us credit, whatever. I mean, we'd like to have credit, but no, feel free to deploy this as you like, but let us know how you're deploying it, right? I mean, we'd love to do that. Our next step is to figure out a decolonial protocol for using this scale, right? We don't think that this should stand alone. We think it should be part of focus groups. It should be part of reflection exercises from the students. We need to talk about, you know, so what we're doing is we're having people from different universities deploy this. And I hate the word deploy, but I'm not sure I know a better one at this point, implement. And then they're coming back to us like, well, our students decided that the faculty wouldn't be involved in this at all, or, you know, what's the best practices for deploying an instrument like this? So we'd love to get that kind of feedback. And of course, feedback on the instrument is huge. I mean, that's, you know, this is an organic document that, you know, somebody had a question about a specific, Aziza asked, and this might be a best question for Sophie, would be interesting to hear you unpack course assessments focus on my voice and experience. Sophie, are you available to talk about that, or am I putting you on the spot?
Oops, I'm back. I'm here.
Sorry.
I think it was the concept of kind of like what was said during the presentation, like what is it that the students learned within the course, like were they actually at the center of like the activities? Did they feel like empowered in the activities and like the different assessments? And also that probably goes back, kind of like ties with like another item in the scale of like, does it center in your own experience too? Like, are you able to refer to your own experience, like as a member of a certain community, et cetera, et cetera? I think this was the main goal with that comment, is to really center on the student. Did I make sense?
Yeah, and I think I've had questions about that item too. I mean, because it does talk about assessments, and so I wonder, like, does that tie in with what Emily and Chris and Carolyn were talking about the assessment actually being part of storytelling of some sort, or was the assessment instrument itself for the course, did it tap into your experiences? I don't know. I mean, I think we've gone back and forth on that item.
Yeah, I think it's that, and I think it's like the idea also of the instructor is not the only one who's judging your progress in the class, but also you're capable of kind of like discussing what you've learned and how you think you have made progress in the class, and not just based on like outside criteria.
Yeah.
Like I know, for example, like when if I was to tie that to my experience, I know that like when I took a specific course in the human rights practice program, I realized that my thing is leadership. Like during my entire life, I thought that my thing was to just be in the shadows and maybe fundraising, etc., which is exactly what I did. And then I took that class and I realized like, oh, actually, like after having like all those speakers, etc., I just realized, okay, no, my thing is leadership. Like if I can be in a position of leadership, that's where I feel comfortable. And so I think this is like course assessment could be an example. Okay, how would you rate what you learned in the class? And this is one of the things I could say. I think I've learned a lot. I think I've developed a lot of skills within that class, because precisely now I realize that, oh, I found my calling. I don't know if I'm making full sense here.
Yeah, no, and that's to just riff on that. I mean, I'm thinking about sometimes when I've been a consultant on development projects, I'll create, for the log framework, I'll say one of the outcomes is that we'll have 2 or 3 outcomes that we didn't expect. And some funding agencies are like, what do you mean? You're just making crap up here. But what we're really talking about is that, in the process of doing participatory videos, it's not really participatory and decolonial unless like we have the aha moments too, like that, so like, we listed all those outcomes for a class, but students are going to have outcomes that we never expected, like your leadership example. And is there room for that? Is there, and I think we do that sometimes in our classes, Leonard, sometimes every once in a while, like a student will say, wow, in the 4th week, halfway through the class, that was so cool. I can't believe that. I didn't even know that there was a field of forensics and human rights. I want to do my final project on it. We're like, wow, okay, this isn't a forensics and human rights class. But then we're like, okay, go ahead and do it. And then all of a sudden their outcome is something that we had no idea of when we made the syllabus.
And it's also taking into account the fact that all students don't start from the same level. And so if we just have like a static grading scale, then it's going to be complicated, because maybe I'm going to have the exact same result as like my peer, but at the end of the day, I came from 3rd or down the road. That was like, it took me longer to reach that goal. And so from my own perspective, I've done like, I deserve an A, whereas like maybe my peer would deserve like an A-, because technically I'm coming from 3rd away. Like, I guess that was kind of like our idea with this item.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think of in that video that you can watch about this class, Leonard's very poignant statement where he's talking about a student who said even though she lived in Bishkek her whole life, she'd never really seen a homeless person, even though she'd pass them every day. And she said, after this class, now I see homeless people. And I mean, that's an outcome that we had no idea. You could have sat down for days and weeks and not come up with that as an outcome.
Yeah, I have to say that was very fulfilling. It certainly weird as well. So.
Well, we are right at time. So I think this is a really perfect point to wrap up. So thank you so much, Leonard, Bill, and Liudmila. That was a really, really awesome presentation. Really interesting. So thank you. And I think